How did prehistoric smiths achieve temperatures and chemical purities we thought were impossible until the modern era? This ancient Iron Age citadel was actually a high-tech foundry hidden in the clouds. By examining these rare crystalline structures, we are witnessing the birth of advanced metallurgy long before the history books allowed. The discovery begins almost by accident. An isolated sweep across a remote landscape reveals the ruins of a forgotten citadel, half buried beneath layers of dust and time. At first glance, it appears unremarkable, just another relic fading into the background of history. But then comes the anomaly. Scattered across the ground are fragments unlike anything expected in such a place. Dense, unusually heavy, and fused into a glassy, slag-like material. They catch the light in a way that feels out of place, as if they are the byproduct of something far more intense than simple habitation. This is where the contradiction begins. According to established historical maps, early technological hubs, centers of metallurgy and advanced production, were concentrated in entirely different regions. This site, by contrast, lies far outside those known zones, in an area traditionally associated with minimal development and primitive tool use. There are no records, no transitional evidence, nothing to suggest that such high-temperature processes should have occurred here. And yet, the physical material tells a different story, one that cannot be easily dismissed. Slag is not a natural formation. It is the result of industrial activity, specifically the byproduct of smelting or processing materials at extremely high temperatures. To produce it requires not only heat, but controlled conditions, furnaces capable of sustaining intense heat, knowledge of materials, and a system for managing the entire process. Its presence here raises a direct and uncomfortable question. How did such activity take place in a location where it theoretically shouldn't exist? The implication is immediate and compelling. Either our understanding of early technological distribution is incomplete, or this site represents an isolated development, an outlier that challenges the broader narrative. But the nature of the material suggests something more deliberate, more systematic. This was not a one-time event or an experimental fire. The volume and consistency of the slag point toward repeated, sustained activity, something closer to an industrial process than a primitive attempt. And that is the hook that draws the investigation deeper. Evidence of high-heat industry appearing in a place defined by its supposed simplicity forces a reassessment of assumptions. It suggests that the boundaries of early technological capability may not be as fixed as we believe, because when the dirt itself begins to reveal traces of processes far beyond what should be possible, it becomes clear that the real story is not what we expected to find, but what was never supposed to be there in the first place. The investigation shifts from the windswept isolation of the field into the controlled precision of the laboratory, where the real story begins to emerge, not on the surface, but deep within the material itself. Under microscopic analysis, the slag-like fragments reveal a hidden architecture of crystalline structures, patterns that cannot be seen with the naked eye. What initially appeared as random glassy debris now resolves into something far more deliberate, ordered formations that speak to controlled thermal processes and intentional design. As researchers examine these internal structures, a startling conclusion begins to take shape. The samples exhibit characteristics consistent with high-carbon steel, specifically the kind of microstructures that form only when iron is heated to extremely high temperatures and then cooled under controlled conditions. These are not the chaotic byproducts of accidental fires or primitive smelting attempts. They are signatures of a process that requires both knowledge and precision. The temperatures needed to produce such material were, until now, believed to be beyond the capabilities of the era associated with the site. The presence of these patterns raises an even more important question. How was carbon introduced and controlled within the metal? In early metallurgy, carbon content often varies unpredictably, resulting in inconsistent material properties. But here, the distribution appears intentional. The chemical signatures suggest that the smiths were not merely working with whatever conditions they had. They were actively manipulating carbon levels to achieve specific results. This implies an understanding of material behavior that goes beyond trial and error, entering the realm of deliberate engineering. Such control would require not only high heat, but also the ability to regulate the environment in which the metal was processed, managing airflow, fuel composition, and timing with a level of precision that contradicts the notion of purely primitive techniques. It points toward a system, a repeatable method refined over time rather than isolated experimentation. In this context, the microscopic evidence becomes one of the strongest pieces of the puzzle. Unlike large structures that can be interpreted in multiple ways, these internal patterns are governed by the laws of physics and chemistry. They cannot be easily misread or dismissed. They record the exact conditions under which the material was formed, preserving a snapshot of processes that no longer exist in plain sight. What emerges is a picture that challenges the established narrative at its core. The truth is not just written in stone, it is encoded at the microscopic level, revealing a level of technological control that forces a reconsideration of what was possible and when. When the 2026 laboratory findings are placed side by side with what traditional metallurgy textbooks describe, the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. For decades, the established narrative has portrayed early metalworking as a slow, experimental process, limited by low temperatures, inconsistent results, and a gradual accumulation of knowledge over time. Yet the evidence emerging from this site tells a very different story. The microstructures, chemical compositions, and thermal signatures do not align with primitive trial and error methods. They reflect controlled, repeatable processes that belong to a far more advanced stage of development. This leads to a striking realization. What has long been labeled a primitive fortress may have been producing industrial-grade metal centuries, perhaps even millennia, ahead of its supposed place in history. The quality of the material is not accidental, nor is it marginally improved over known techniques. It represents a leap, one that bypasses intermediate stages entirely and arrives at a level of sophistication that should not exist within the accepted timeline. Such discrepancy cannot be easily explained as an outlier or anomaly. It demands a reassessment of the broader framework itself. At its core, this challenges one of the most deeply rooted assumptions in historical science, the idea that technological evolution is linear. According to this model, humanity progresses step by step, each advancement building predictably on the last. But the evidence here suggests something far less orderly. Instead of a smooth progression, it hints at discontinuities, periods where knowledge may have surged forward, only to be lost, forgotten, or buried beneath layers of time. If that is the case, then what we are seeing is not an early step in development, but a fragment of a much more complex cycle. A cycle where innovation does not simply accumulate, but can also disappear, leaving behind only traces that seem out of place when viewed through a linear lens. The fortress, the metal, and the microscopic evidence all point toward a past that may have been more advanced and more fragile than we have been willing to consider. In the end, defying the historical timeline is not about rejecting established knowledge, but about recognizing its limits. When new evidence consistently falls outside those limits, the responsible response is not to force it back into place, but to expand the framework itself. Because history, like the materials it studies, is shaped not just by what we expect to find, but by what we cannot explain away. The deeper the investigation goes, the more the focus shifts from what was made to how it was made. Reconstructing the potential furnace designs behind this citadel's output reveals a level of control that feels anything but primitive. To achieve the extreme thermal consistency implied by the metallurgical evidence, these furnaces would have required more than open fires or simple pits. Instead, they likely operated as enclosed systems, structures capable of concentrating and sustaining heat while regulating airflow with precision. Carefully engineered chambers, possibly lined with heat-resistant materials, could have maintained stable temperatures over long periods, allowing metal to be processed under controlled conditions rather than fluctuating, unpredictable ones. Airflow would have been the critical factor. Whether through bellows, natural draft systems, or more advanced channeling of wind currents, the ability to feed oxygen into the furnace at a consistent rate would directly determine the achievable temperature. The evidence suggests not just high heat, but sustained high heat, something that demands coordination between fuel, airflow, and chamber design. This is not the signature of casual experimentation. It points toward a refined system, one that had been optimized through repeated use and deep understanding. Equally revealing is the composition of the slag itself. Analysis indicates the presence of specific additives, flux materials intentionally introduced to alter the behavior of the molten metal. These substances would help remove impurities, lower melting points, and improve the overall quality of the final product. Their presence is not random. It suggests that the metallurgists working here had a working knowledge of chemical interactions, selecting and combining materials to achieve predictable results. This level of sophistication implies not only technical skill, but also access to local ore sources that were carefully chosen and processed with intent. The surrounding region may have provided the raw materials, but it was the method, the controlled blending of ore, fuel, and flux, that transformed those resources into something exceptional. This raises a more intriguing question. How did such advanced techniques emerge in isolation? If this knowledge existed, why did it not spread, evolve, or leave clearer traces in neighboring regions? One possibility is that these methods were closely guarded, treated as specialized knowledge held by a small group of skilled practitioners. In a world where technological advantage could mean survival or dominance, secrecy would have been a powerful tool. Techniques may have been passed down through limited lineages, protected rather than shared, and ultimately lost if those lineages disappeared. Another possibility is that the conditions required, specific materials, environmental factors, or cultural priorities, were unique to this location, making the methods difficult to replicate elsewhere. What remains is a paradox, a localized center of advanced production that seems disconnected from the broader historical narrative. The furnaces are gone, the tools are missing, and the knowledge has vanished. But the innertage remain, locked within the material itself. They speak of a system that once worked with precision and purpose, leaving behind just enough evidence to suggest that something far more advanced existed here than history currently acknowledges. What begins as a single anomaly quickly expands into a much larger question. How many other hidden pockets of advanced knowledge are still buried beneath our feet? If one isolated site can produce evidence that contradicts the accepted timeline so dramatically, it becomes increasingly difficult to assume it is alone. Across deserts, jungles, and ocean floors, there may be countless undiscovered locations, each one holding fragments of technologies, methods, and ideas that never made it into the official record. The map of human history, as we know it, may not just be incomplete, it may be missing entire chapters. These advanced pockets challenge the notion that innovation followed a single, predictable path. Instead, they point toward a world where knowledge could appear, flourish, and disappear, leaving behind only subtle traces for us to rediscover thousands of years later. Instead, they point toward a world where knowledge could appear, flourish, and disappear, leaving behind only subtle traces for us to rediscover thousands of years later. As a result, this discovery does more than add a new data point. It forces a re-evaluation of the entire global technological timeline. The traditional model, built on gradual progression, struggles to accommodate evidence of sudden leaps in capability. If industrial-grade metallurgy, precise engineering, and controlled processes existed far earlier than expected, then the timeline itself must be adjusted. Not slightly, but fundamentally. It is not a matter of filling gaps, but of redrawing the framework from which those gaps are measured. And in that shift, something deeper begins to emerge, a renewed appreciation for the brilliance of our ancestors. These were not merely early experimenters slowly discovering the basics. They may have been innovators operating at levels we are only now beginning to recognize. Their achievements, preserved in stone and metal, suggest a capacity for understanding, creativity, and precision that rivals our own expectations of modern capability. Ultimately, this is not just about the past, it is about perspective. If human potential once reached heights that were later forgotten, then our current understanding of progress may be far too narrow. The story of humanity may not be a straight line moving forward, but a far more complex journey of discovery, loss, and rediscovery. And somewhere within that journey lies a powerful reminder that what we are capable of is not limited by what we remember, but by what we are willing to question and uncover. If this discovery made you rethink everything about human history, don't just watch, join the conversation. Drop your opinion in the comments. Do you believe there are more hidden advanced civilizations waiting to be found? Hit like if you want more content that challenges the timeline, and subscribe to stay with me as we uncover the next pieces of this incredible puzzle.